From all your waters, America, I choose the river with the magical name, Monongahela. For the river has a tale to tell, even deeper and longer than it is. Over homesteads, humpbacked houses, there remains still the pall of gun smoke, writing the story of the awaited massacre. And the sooty smokestacks of Carnegie will not cover the writing of the gun smoke, as long as the Monongahela River tells this story to its banks.
At the beginning of 1892, the people of Homestead, Pennsylvania, had no idea of the upheaval that was about to transform their lives. They had built a proud and prosperous community upriver from Pittsburgh. In just 10 years, 12,000 men, women, and children had settled around the Carnegie Steelworks. They were setting records in the production of armor plate and structural steel, and transforming America in the process.
The past and present are known, and the record fills every homesteader with pride. What of the future? It is full of promise. Flanked by the greatest industrial city of the Union, with splendid railroad and water facilities, having the most extensive and varied steel mills in the country, the future growth of Homestead will undoubtedly be more rapid than its past, and before another decade, it will be the largest town in western Pennsylvania.
By the end of 1892, Homestead would be known throughout the world, but not for the reasons its boosters had hoped. A fierce conflict would erupt that summer, pitting the country's most powerful labor union against its largest steelmaker. The workers' right to organize hung in the balance. The outcome would shape their lives for generations to come. In the wake of the Civil War, an industrial revolution swept across America. Manufacturing flourished, and daring entrepreneurs became rich, very rich. But for the average factory worker, the revolution meant endless drudgery, long hours, and dangerous work.
April 2nd, 1892. The history of the Homestead Steelworks is marked with a large number of frightful accidents. That of last Saturday, wherein one man lost his life and 7 others received serious injuries, was scarcely less terrible. Molten metal came in contact with moisture, resulting in a terrific explosion, some of it striking the opposite wall 70 feet away.
Where machines were present, death and injury were commonplace. A single slip could cost a man his life. A widow was lucky if the company picked up the cost of the funeral. Children worked, some falling victim to indifferent machines. Even 3-year-olds sometimes spent 12-hour shifts at their mother's sides. Sooty streets, open sewers, and foul air were the trademarks of many factory towns. Workers often depended on the company for housing and owed their pay to company-run stores. Homestead was radically different. Work in the mill was just as hazardous, but steelworkers had built a powerful union which gave them a say in hiring, wages, and how jobs were done. The Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers had 800 members in Homestead, all skilled craftsmen. Workers' organizations, not the company, dominated civic life. Many homesteaders owned their own houses, Their taxes were bringing lights and sidewalks to city streets. Decent pay allowed their children to attend school, and reasonable hours in the mill left them time to run the local government.
The Constitution of this country guarantees all men the right to live. But in order to live, we must keep up a continuous struggle.
Homestead's elected leader was a union man, John McLucky. He had been active in labor politics since his days as a Pennsylvania coal miner. He believed that every working man should be able to feed and house his family. McLucky could be counted on to stick to his principles. He got his first job in steel in nearby Braddock. His employer was Andrew Carnegie, the man he would face in a bitter confrontation in 1892. Carnegie was a poor weaver's son when he left his native Scotland in 1848. By the 1880s, he had become one of America's leading industrialists. He was among the first iron manufacturers in the country to invest in steel. A stronger and more flexible metal than iron, steel proved highly profitable. It was rapidly replacing iron in railroad, bridge, and skyscraper construction, and revolutionary new technologies made it easier to produce. The iron industry relied on highly skilled, unionized craftsmen. Far fewer skilled men were needed to make steel. This left the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers vulnerable, and opened the way for steel manufacturers to seize control of the shop floor. In mill after mill, workers fought back, but few succeeded. When the original owners of the Homestead Mill tried to impose a non-union contract in 1882, Homestead's workers accused them of instituting a new form of slavery.
To the editors, National Labor Tribune. Just think of it, fellow workmen, living in a land where not 20 years ago we had a war against slavery, in a land where freedom and independence was proclaimed, that we would go on in our right minds and sober senses and sign away our rights as free-born American citizens.
The message of the Homestead workers resonated up and down the Monongahela River Valley, and Homestead won its fight to remain a union mill. A year later, Andrew Carnegie purchased the Homestead Works and became America's biggest steel producer. With his working-class roots and his public statements on the rights of labor, Carnegie seemed just the man to oversee Homestead's workforce.
The right of the working man to combine and to form trades unions is no less sacred than the right of the manufacturer to enter into associations and conferences with his fellows, and it must sooner or later be conceded.
Carnegie made a commitment to use his wealth to improve the lives of his workers. He built libraries, schools, and concert halls, costing huge sums of money. To acquire this wealth, Carnegie increasingly focused on the bottom line. He began by eliminating most of his industrial competition. Then he drove the unions out of his mills. When unionized workers refused to yield, he hired armed guards to bring in non-union replacements. Homestead alone withstood Carnegie's assaults. In 1889, its powerful union forced the company to negotiate a 3-year contract after thousands of homesteaders confronted county deputies trying to bring non-union workers into town. As the end of that contract approached in 1892, Carnegie was determined to assert his rights and gain absolute control over the mill. From his home in New York City, he drafted a notice to the Homestead workers.
There has been forced upon this firm the question whether its works are to be run union or non-union. As the vast majority of our employees are non-union, the firm has decided that the minority must give way to the majority. These works, therefore, will be necessarily non-union after the expiration of the present agreement.
Carnegie sent the notice to the company's officers in Pittsburgh, but they never showed it to the Homestead workers. Instead, they urged Carnegie to take his annual vacation in Scotland and leave the matter to the company chairman, Henry Clay Frick. Frick was a brilliant entrepreneur. He made his fortune by buying up the region's best coal fields and by building over 1,000 ovens that turned coal into coke, an essential fuel for making steel. The Carnegie Company was Frick's biggest client, and in 1882 they negotiated a substantial interest in each other's firms.